It's the last day of Chanuka, and you all had experienced Chanuka. Chanuka carries within it tremendous lessons. But at the last day of Chanuka, after we had already gone through all the lessons, I would like to see if we can actually get a personal touch of the message of Chanuka, of the principle of Chanuka. Find it in ourselves and see, yes, I can relate to this Inyan. Chanuka is an extremely profound message. But because it is both a profound message but very simple and very pure, we can and we should and we all actually thirst for this, for the message of Chanuka. Let us just first examine and understand the gist of the Yom Tov. We know, I'm sure you all know, that Chanuka came in the aftermath of a war against the Greeks, who at that time actually dominated Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael was not an independent country, even though they had their own rulers and kings, but they were subject to the emperor, to the empire of and rule of the empire of the Greeks. And at the point of around the area, the time of Chanuka, what brought about a rebellion on the part of the Jewish populace, of the Jews accepted the rulership of the Greeks as long as they were left alone to do their own thing. Because the Greeks actually began to meddle in their internal affairs, in their faith, in their principles of life. And the term principles of life is very accurate, because the Greeks did not meddle in the practices, in how they lived their lives per se. What they objected to was the principle of that, the underlying principle of all those practices. Because, as we know, and you know from history, that the Greeks, even prior to the time of Chanuka, the ancient Greeks were great philosophers, very learned men, and they respected philosophy, they respected learning. And from that perspective, they respected the Torah immensely, because they recognized that the Torah is a very profound and very clear description of human life. And they had no objection for even to study the Torah, to learn the Torah, and even to practice much of what the Torah requires them to practice. What they objected was the one principle, that the Torah is a God-given law, that it's God-given, that it's godly. So what was so objectionable? Why did the Greeks, the Eden still lived completely differently than the Greeks, and they didn't mind that. Why were they so adamant about this principle? And what was that Eden were fighting for? And why did it turn out that the principal miracle of Chanuka, although the war was in itself a tremendous miracle, that the Rebbe Hashem helped like we say in Al Anisim, Rabim be'at miatim, the many in the hands of the few, the boirim at chaloshim, the powerful in the hands of the weak, which is miraculous. But nevertheless, the great point of celebration of Chanuka is not centered around the war, it is centered around the jug of oil, the miracle of the oil. The Greeks maintained, as I said, the Greeks were philosophers, and they believed that human life has to be based on philosophy. And on that basis, they believed that all human phenomenon, all world phenomenon, has to be understandable in a philosophical and logical manner. There is no principle. The only principle there is that we have a physical world. What you make of it and how you treat it is all up to you. If it's logical for you to behave one way, so you behave another way. If it's logical for you to behave another way, then you behave another way. But there is no principle that says, no, there is a true way to behave. There is a truth to the presence of the world. In other words, they believed in the natural process. And we discussed in these sessions many times the concept of what is the natural process and what is the godly principle. In Torah terms, there is the term of tahara, purity, and the term tuma, which is impurity. We know that the jug of oil, that the big miracle of the jug of oil was not the fact that the big miracle of the jug of oil, we all know, is the fact that it lasted for 8 days. But there was an underlying factor behind it. Because in fact, there was plenty of oil in the Beis HaMikdash when the Yidden entered the Beis HaMikdash. What was missing was pure oil. Oil that was rendered impure by the Greeks. And halachically, we are permitted to use tumidike oil, I would say impure oil that's tomei. They're allowed to use in Beis HaMikdash when the whole congregation is tomei. So they were halachically permitted to use that oil. But Eden had insisted that no, that since that we fought, that what we fought for is for tahara, for purity, and therefore we're going to have only pure things in the Beis HaMikdash. And I want to examine the concept of purity and impurity, the way it is mentioned in conjunction with Chanuka. To take a very simple illustration in our own terms, because I really want that we should be able to relate personally to this message. We say that if someone does a favor to someone else, but he has an ulterior motive, but it's a real favor, he's doing a good thing, but he has something else that's motivating him to do that. He gives charity, which is a mitzvah, a great thing. But in the back of his mind, he wants to be recognized. He wants to benefit from this recognition some other way. We say that the deed is a good deed, but it lacks purity. It's not pure. Which means, what does this purity mean? Normally, it's a tzedakah. When a person does tzedakah, does a favor to someone else, that the action itself is the same. Whether it's pure or impure, you can't tell. What is a pure action? A pure action is an action that comes directly from his mind and his heart. There is nothing interfering between his mind, heart, and his hands. It goes direct. The concept of going of a direct flow, mind, heart, and hand, is represented by the word pure. Because the hands are activated. What makes the hand move? What makes the hand act? All action is empowered by the mind, by the heart. So if this empowerment is direct, there is nothing extraneous, nothing from the side that comes from an ulterior, from an external source, then we say that this is a pure act. A pure act of charity, a pure act of tzedakah. If there is an interference, which means he also understands that it's a good act, it's a good thing to do mitzvah, to do this favor, to give tzedakah. And he feels even that tzedakah is a nice thing. But that feeling and that recognition alone is not enough for him to get up and go and do it. He has to have an ulterior justification. A justification on the practical level. Why should I? Why should I get involved with this other person? I have to have a personal reason for it. That renders this act impure. Which means that it doesn't come directly from mind, heart, and hand, but there is something else that's pushing it. As a matter of fact, it's conceivable that because there's attention given to his action, this is why he's doing it. The attention does not come from his mind. The attention does not come from his heart. It comes from the practical situation where he is, the circumstance. So we have a sort of a superficial but a clear definition of the word pure and impure. The principle of Jewish life, the principle of Torah, the principle of doing things because they are written in the Torah, because Hashem commanded them to us, is the principle that says you have to do that. The action that we do has the quality of purity. Purity means God created the world. The whole world is empowered, is inspired by the presence of God, and it is that inspiration that comes through the words of the Torah, that is defined in the Torah, how God defines the Torah, how God had envisioned, so to speak, in the world, what God has imbued into the world. And from that purity, we come through and we go ahead and we act accordingly. Like we discussed many times in the past, I just want to allude to it because we discussed it many times in the past, that when we say, this is a little bit more about, I don't want to deviate too much, but just to remind you that we say in the 6 days of creation that God created, let's say, day and night, light and dark. So if you remember, we discussed this Indian that God actually created day and night, which means there is a definition to day as a definition to night. Night and day are not just the results of the fact that it's dark and light, but that there is a real creation that God defined as day and night. Furthermore, God created the whole universe. And the universe had no significance, had no meaning. Everything was in there. The fish and the fowl and the animals, everything was there. And it had absolutely no significance until that Adam Horishan, that God created man. And then he told Adam Horishan, you name everything that I created. What does that mean? We discussed it the other day. You name everything I created means that you find and identify the real significance of each one of these creatures, which is not just what it eats and what its nature is, but what is its meaning, what is the meaning that this creature exists in the world, what is it for, what does it represent? And Adam Horishan was the one who named it, because Adam Horishan was the one who was able to place everything in the world in its proper place. And thus, everything acquired a true godly purpose. It wasn't just living according to its nature, but it has a true function, a true part in the world. The Greeks objected to the concept of purity. Totally. They said that if charity is a good act, it has to have a simple human definition to it. It has nothing to do with the creation, with the existence of the world. It has nothing to do with the truth of existence. It has to have a human quality to it, meaning you do it because you have personal benefit from it. You have a personal explanation why you're doing it. And since that one human being, if he regards himself as separate from another human being, there is no way that he can do it purely, because he has no connection to it, to the other person. He has to have some kind of explanation, some kind of ulterior motive and reason why he's acting in the way he's acting. So that the Greeks insisted that no, this is folly, you must view the world from a natural perspective. There are no inherent principles in the world. There are no inherent values in the world. It is what you make of it, what makes sense to the human being, that's what exists. And this is what's expressed in the davening. I'm sure you've learned this, that when we say in the Al Hanisim, that when the Greeks came and they wanted to enforce their principles on us, it does not say that they wanted that we should change our way of life. But Lashkichom, as you say in Al Hanisim, Lashkichom Teirosecho, that we should forget that it's your Torah. They should forget that there is a godly quality to the Torah. Torah is a wonderful philosophy, a wonderful way of looking at human life. But it's all human smarts. It is not God-given. And as I explained, the principle of the fact that it's not God-given means that it's not intrinsically true. There is no purity to it. It does not flow directly from the essence of creation, from the essence of existence. This is the way it has to be. This is the way it was conceptualized from the beginning of existence. This means purity. Shabbos, for instance, the mitzvah of Shabbos, the world knows Shabbos as a day of rest. And the day of rest makes perfect good sense. Sure, people should have a day off. They shouldn't be bogged down with work continuously. They should have a moment to reflect, to rest, and to come back to themselves. Everybody understands that. But what is Shabbos in fact? What is our Shabbos? As the Torah defines it, as we relate to it. Shabbos is not even what's called a Jewish day. a Jewish Yom Tov. All other Yomim Tovim, I don't know if you're aware of this, all other Yomim Tovim, like Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, every Yom Tov was created after the Jewish people. Now it was first with the Jewish people. And then came around that there was a Pesach, and there's a Shavuos, and there's Sukkot. Because these Yomim Tovim have to do with Jewish life, have to do with how people live. Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, the Torah defines as Pesach being the Yom Tov of when you plant. Sukkot is Shavuos is when you harvest, and Sukkot is when you gather into the produce. Now, it has to do with human life, and you celebrate the various periods in the year that have that, where you see Hashem's bracha and so forth. But it has to do with the Jewish people. Shabbos preceded everything. Shabbos is a day of rest as defined in the Torah. It's God's own day of rest. This is the day that the entire creation rests. Not the human being rests. The entire creation rests. The entire creation then is on a different level. How and so forth, that's not enough in this context, but this is the way the Torah defines it. This is the day, God's own day of rest from in the creation. So came the Greeks and said, I don't understand where you're coming from. What is the difference between Shabbos and Sunday and Friday? It's the same word. I don't see any difference. You want to rest? Go right ahead. Rest as much as you want. But don't say that there is that this day of rest is based on and is drawn from the very essence of creation, from the very essence of existence. Where does this come from? You have a good reason for it? Go right ahead. The purity, and to say no, that the creation itself, the very existence of the creation, the very existence, the very inception of existence, has a plan, has a meaning, and one day is not like the next. Even though superficially we don't see the difference. But because that every day that the world, that the creation is a godly creation, therefore every day has its own message and its own place in the world. And thus, comes Shabbos, it's different than Friday and different than Sunday. Because there is a godly quality to it. Because God is the one who defines what a day is. Not the sun and the moon. The sun only serves, like I said in the Torah, it serves during the day. But the sun doesn't define day. God is the one who defines day. Which means that there is a pure quality to this. Shabbos is just plain Shabbos, not because I need to rest. Not because I'm tired. As a matter of fact, in Halacha, just an interesting phenomenon in Halacha, you know that there is, Shabbos, there is a din of muktzah. Muktzah means that there are certain objects, basically objects that are not made for the usage on Shabbos for eating or such things, or sforim, things that are essentially used for activities that are not done on Shabbos are called muktzah. Muktzah means that they're set aside, and we're not allowed to move them. We're not allowed to move them from one place to the other in the house and so forth. Muktzah. So there are many reasons for this din of muktzah. It's interesting, many reasons that the Gemara says. One of the reasons for muktzah is to include the Talmidei Chachomim into Shabbos. Talmidei Chachomim, they sit a whole day, a whole week also and learn. They're not involved in work. So how are they going to notice that it's Shabbos in so to speak, on an ongoing basis? If you say, a farmer, Shabbos, he doesn't go out to his farm, you could see, he feels the difference between Shabbos and Friday. When a Talmid Chacham, who sits and learns on Friday, sits and learns on Shabbos, how is he going to notice? How is he going to feel the presence of Shabbos? Chacham said, one way is that he is also going to be restricted from what he's allowed to move around and what he's not. So to remind him that it's Shabbos. In other words, Shabbos is not just for people to take a rest. Because here we are, have people who do not need a rest. They're doing the same thing on Friday as on Shabbos. And yet this is Friday and this is Shabbos, totally different days. So what is the meaning of the word purity in our activity, in our lives? Purity means that it flows purely, just as we said in purity in a human action, that flows directly from mind, heart into action. Purity in the world means that it flows purely and directly from the Creator. It represents entirely and purely the will of the Creator. There is no interference from the world. There is no worldly justification interfering with this action and say, it's done because it makes sense from that perspective and that perspective, for that benefit or that benefit. It's done because this is a godly command, because this is the presence of God in the world. It represents God's presence in the world. This was the great objection of the Greeks. They wanted to introduce impurity into Jewish life. And this is what Eden have, and as a matter of fact, if you know history, that during that era, there were many Eden who were actually drawn in with the Greeks because of this fine distinction. Because he said, what's wrong? What's wrong if I keep Shabbos because it makes sense? Of course, once you go on this path, then you lose contact with with most of the Torah. But at first, this is how they were drawn in. It makes sense. I feel proud that I'm following my intelligence. So therefore, the fight, the rebellion that even rebelled against the Greek rule, because they were forced to rebel. And what forced them to rebel? Because they did not want to lose that purity. They insisted, they said, no, we in our lives, you completely misunderstanding our lives. Our lives is not what we do. Our lives is what we are. And our connection to Hashem is not because He is good and because He is smart and because He is wise, but because He is the truth. And this is our connection. I want to discuss this a little broader and then we'll go to Chanuka. One of the things that everyone strives for, each one is hungry for, he wants to feel completely involved in what he does. He wants to feel that he is not doing things by rote because that's the way everybody else does it. Because if he doesn't do it, he's going to be an outsider. He won't fit in. He wants to feel that he belongs and he fits in. He knows what he's doing and he is a part of what's going on. And for this end, we try to understand the meaning of an action and to get it and reflect on it and get deeply involved in it. Maybe it'll actually hit in my brain and it'll make perfect sense, and I will feel completely at home and completely united with this action. But we find that no matter how much we try, we fail. Because there's always some kind of background thought, but I'm still doing it because other people are doing it. I'm still doing it because I have to. I'm not doing it because I really found it, I really invented it, I really created it. I'm doing it because I'm part of, I'm so to speak, in the moving river, and I have to go with the flow. This is something which frustrates many people. And the reason it frustrates, the reason is that they're actually looking to an answer to a question in the wrong source. Because in fact, as we said before, from a rational, from the seichel perspective, it is really impossible to do something purely. Because if you're an outsider, if you regard your friend as something separate from you, there's no way that you're going to become one. You're not one. And everything you do is going to have some kind of reason, something that connects you. The Indian that is, where is this possible? The reason that we have that quest. And where is it in fact possible? It is possible only if you recognize that each one of us is here not by his own choice, not by his own creation, by creating himself. He is here because he was put here by the Creator. And if he recognizes that he represents the Eibushin's presence in the world, then, that's what the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, then he will see his friend also representing the very same thing. And then he can unite with everything in the world. The Eden fought the Greeks because the Eden said, we are not accepting the position, the place of being strangers in God's world. We're not strangers in God's world. We are in God's world because God himself put us here. And God himself is here. And we relate to God directly. And that's why we have all the strength to fight it, because this is our reality. The reality as we see the world is not the world, but we see God's presence in the world. That's the reality. That's the reality that we live in. And Shabbos, in fact, we insist that Shabbos is God's own day of rest. And that's why we are resting it. We are resting in it. Because God took us into his palace, into his private domain, and he said, this is my day of rest, and I want you to join me. This is what it says in the Torah. It says in the Torah, Shabbos, I'm talking about Shabbos specifically, it says, Ki ois hi beini uveinechem, that Shabbos is a sign, is a symbol between me and you. Lodas ki ani Hashem Elokeichem, so that it be known that I am your God. So Rashi explains, how is it known through Shabbos that God is our God? Ani Hashem Elokeichem. So Rashi says, it is known that since I have given to you, God says, I've given to you my day of rest, that it should be your day of rest, so that's how you know that that we are one thing. You're not strangers over here. You're not just doing what I'm telling you. You and I are one thing. This was the principle at Eden stood on. And we can readily see that you can do everything in the Torah and miss this principle. And it's not the same Torah, and it's not the same meaning at all. But the meaning of our lives, the meaning of the Jewish people, is precisely this principle. On the contrary, we know throughout history that Eden have had all kinds of ups and downs. There were times that Eden, Nachman son, sinned. There were times that Eden strayed from the Torah. Sometimes they kept the Torah. From the beginning, from the inception, from the beginning of time, when Eden first received the Torah, right after that there were sins. But one thing did not happen, that Eden dissociated himself from God. Yes, they had challenges, they fell off, they went higher, they went up, but never dissociated themselves from God. They said, this is our principle, this is what our lives are. And here came the Greeks and said, on the contrary, I'll give you everything, I'll grant you everything. Just one thing, break away from God. And that's what Eden fought for. That's the principle, not a way of life. Do and don't, none of that. Just this one pure principle. That's why it's called purity. Because the idea of purity is that it comes direct from God. There's no ulterior pathways. By the way, the korbanos, the sacrifices, the Mikdash, are called Tohorim. The korbanos, there's much to speak about the korbanos. I'm sure that it's not an easy topic to understand, but just one principle in the korbanos. It says, the Gemara says that the highest avodah is korbanos. And reflected in our lives, the korbanos are the tefillah, prayer, davening. Davening is reflected in our lives, and today is in the place of korbanos. Because korbanos have nothing at all to do with the world. Korbanos is a statement that the world and God is one thing. And this is where we come in prayer. In prayer, when you learn, you use your brain to understand what you're learning. In tefillah, in prayer, you are just speaking directly to Hashem. There is no intervening thing. That's why prayer has this purity, similar to korbanos. After the miracle of the war, and Eden came to Beis Hamikdash, and they wanted to renew the Avodah in Beis Hamikdash, and it came to lighting the menorah. Lighting the menorah, again, as I mentioned, there was plenty of war, and when the fire burns, there is absolutely no difference whether the oil that it burns from is pure or impure. There's no difference whatsoever. So Eden and that generation who fought for this principle said the fact that it makes no difference is precisely what we fought for. You cannot tell the difference. When you look at the world, you can actually see a world without including the presence of God in it. And when you look at it with or without God, you see exactly the same world. In terms of the physical presence, identical, nothing changes. The question is only, is this world a meaningless blob of existence, or is it represent God's will? Is there a spirit to it? Is there a meaning and a purpose to it? And all of this is the meaning and purpose. Or is it just a blob of existence and you can do anything you want with it? And if I'm intelligent and I decide as a human being I have to live in a certain way, then I live in a certain way. The animal lives in its own way. So the Eden insisted that they know that they have to light the menorah from pure oil that was not rendered impure, meaning oil that has no touch of of the Greek principles. That the oil is just a few olives that were squeezed out. No, the oil is not just olives that were created. Oil was God's creation in order to light the menorah. That's what it is. It's not just a blob of juice from olives. And that's what purity is. Because the oil that was prepared for the Mizamius was prepared specifically for lighting the menorah. And because that Eden had Mesiras Nefesh, all know the word Mesiras Nefesh, for this principle, they were granted this miracle even though it was not necessary for the basic mitzvah to satisfy their quest that it should be pure oil. Just that. Then the Chachamim saw this miracle and they said, how are we going to perpetuate? How are we going to carry this message of Chanuka for all generations, for all times? If we say that you should light a menorah to remember like we have now 8 days, this would not carry the whole message. Because when you light a candle, it makes sense. You light a candle and you can sit by it and you can read. A candle gives off light, just like Shabbos. You light candles on Shabbos. Why do you light candles on Shabbos? So that you would have light and you would see your food. So there is a logical explanation for it. But that's not what Chanuka is. Chanuka represents the pure principle of the fact that we are Jews and one thing with God. That our lives are on a different level. We just are notch above the ground. We live in the same world, but it has a totally different meaning. And so that's what the Chacham said, that the way we will carry this message for all generations is, yes, we're going to light the candles, but what are we going to do with these candles? We are just going to look at them. We're not allowed to have any use from them. What does that tell you? When you have a light that burns, what is light that burns from the Greek perspective, from the natural perspective? What is the value of a light? That it gives off light, the light that you can use. He said, no. This light has nothing to do with natural light. This light represents the true essence of light. Not practical light. Light that has a natural value to it. But light that represents the essence of the presence of God in the world. Light that represents the essence of the neshama that a Yid has. And the essence of the neshama unity with Hashem. So that this light goes much deeper than just an action to commemorate. This light actually stands for the principle and the message that we as the Jewish people, no matter what the conditions are, no matter what the circumstances are, no matter what our level of understanding of Torah, what our level of involvement in Torah mitzvahs, this light represents the essential, the essence that we and God and the world that we live in is one thing. We live in God's world. We're not strangers over here. We don't have to do anything to justify our being. We light a candle and we're wasting the oil. So that doesn't make any sense from the Greek perspective. We keep Shabbos and we do absolutely nothing. And we can't even eat, we can't even warm up a delicious kugel. That doesn't make any sense from the Greek perspective. What kind of rest is this? But our answer is, this is a godly rest. If you are a stranger in this world, you have to make sense, you have to justify your actions. But if you belong here, then you don't have to justify your actions. Then every action that you do is true in itself. Doesn't have to be justified. And thus, the quest that we started, I mentioned before, just to relate it to us, the quest that everyone has, that he wants to feel involved and feel connected and feel that he actually can personally relate to his life and the Torah mitzvahs. The personal relationship to the life, to Jewish life, the personal relationship to Torah mitzvahs consists of only one statement. I am a Jew. That automatically connects a Yidden directly with the Neighbor. And this automatically gives him the full personal presence and the comfort of doing everything that has to do with Torah mitzvahs. Because the Torah is his Torah. This is the Torah that belongs to him. Like we said, that Shabbos, we are participants in God's day of rest. I don't have to justify it. My seichel doesn't have to understand it. I personally am part of it. It's not my seichel that gives it value. It's my very essence that gives it value. Just like this burning candle. That the very fact that it burns, that is the mitzvah. That signifies this truth, this true message of Chanuka. This says that there is the message of purity. The candle, from an impure perspective, has to have a practical justification for being lit and burned. From a pure perspective, it doesn't need to. God created oil to burn, to make this candle, and that's what it is. It represents this principle, it represents this truth. this is why Chanuka, we all know that from all the Yom Tovim that we have, Chanuka is considered, is called a Chassidische Yom Tov. A Chassidische Yom Tov. You know what Chassidische Yom Tov means? It carries a Hasidic message. Why a Hasidic message? Because the inyan of Hasidus, the principle of Hasidus, like the Baal Shem Tov taught and the Alter Rebbe and so forth, the principle of Hasidus is the statement that there is an inherent connect between Yidden and the Meibusher. Nobody has to create that connection. That connection is not based on the scholarship, not even based on good deeds. It's an inherent connection. This is what's called in the Gemara, what says, Ezahu Chosid, HaMischasid im Kinei. A means who does kindness with the Meibusher. What's mean kindness to the Meibusher? He has a direct connection to Hashem. He's not an outsider. He's not living in his own world and giving the Meibusher, throwing the Meibusher Hashem his good part and say, see God, I'm okay, right? I'm on your side. He is one thing with him. That's Metachosid. And this is where we see in Chanuka. Even were not completely of their way. It wasn't just to be able to follow their way of life and so forth. It was the principle, the statement, that we and the Rebbe is one thing. And nobody can sever that relationship. And for this reason we light candles and we say, no purpose whatsoever. We light the candles because our neshama is alive, our neshama burns, and the Rebbe is Eisheichlo, his Rebbe is with us. That's why we light the candles. To symbolize our connection with the Rebbe, that's all. No, nothing else. And from this principle, and from this light, flow all the inspirations, all our personal relationships with Torah and mitzvahs, and everything else that is involved in our lives. From this inspiration flow our encouragement to go on Mivtzoim and meet other Yidden in the street and ask them to light the Chanuka candle and put on tefillin. Because we don't see any separation. We all represent the pure presence of the Meibusher in the world, no matter where they are and what their status is. It says in Ramban, as a matter of fact, today we laned in the Torah. Today was a very long laning. Did you notice? And at the end of this laning, it says that Aaron was told how to light the menorah. And the Medrash says, Rashi brings it down, that Aaron, that after that all the Nisim brought their korbanos, the Nisim, all the heads of tribes, brought their korbanos for 12 days. And Aaron and his Shevet, the Levim, did not participate in the inauguration of the Mizbeach. Only the other Shvatim. There were 12 Shvatim because the Manasseh and Ephraim were separate. And Aaron and the Levim were not participants. So Aaron felt a little bit dejected that he and his Shevet didn't participate in the inauguration of the Mizbeach. And so then, as a response to this dejection, Hashem told Moshe to tell Aaron, what you do is greater than what they do, than what all of them, because you light them in menorah. Because you light them in menorah. So it says that what's so great about the menorah? I mean, there are other, the korbanos and so forth. What's special about the menorah? So it says, because the menorah, this is something which will never dissipate, which means it will never be interrupted. Korbanos we have only during the time of the Beis Hamikdash, and the menorah it says it will be forever. But the menorah also we don't have. We don't have the menorah in Beis Hamikdash now. So the Ramban says that this refers to the menorahs of Chanuka, because the light of the menorah, which kindles the neshama of the Yid, is now represented in the menorahs of Chanuka. This is why this inyan, this menorah inyan, is permanent, cannot stop, cannot be interrupted. Because under all circumstances, no matter what happens, no matter where we are, the light, the fire in the neshama burns. And it's represented in these neighbors. And from this light, this is where we get, as I said, the inspiration and the guiding light for our normal activity, all of our activities. This is why when we do something that we don't understand, we don't feel strange to it. Because I'm at home. It's in God's world. I don't understand godliness. But I'm not a stranger to it. I'm not an outsider. We are His children. So what if I don't understand? But I'm still belong there. I still can participate fully, because that is not dependent on my understanding. This is who I am. A prince, a child, an infant, a little child in a king's palace doesn't understand what the king is doing. He can come in the middle of a ministerial session and play around. Why? Because he belongs in the palace. This is where he lives. This is his home. He doesn't understand what's going on, but he still belongs there. This is the principle of Chanuka. This is what we stand for. This is what Chanuka stands. This is what we fought for, and this is what we got. We will never feel outsiders in God's world. No matter what kashas we have and how much we don't understand what's going on. We always belong there. Always part of it. We always have the right there. And the fact that we don't understand is not at all a reproach, and not at all a question. What are you doing? Where are you? I belong here. This is the Hashem's Torah. Hashem's Torah. This is my Torah. This is my thing. This is an inherent connection. It's not my intellect that connects it. This is my neshama that connects. Look at the light of Chanuka. Doesn't have to have justification. It's just there. Because that's how God made it. And thus, with Nebash's help, as a result of this Chanuka and all the Chanukas, as a result of all the good things that you experience in Chanuka, you'll get re-inspired and rekindled, and Mitzvah Hashem, have a good year. Okay.